Hello friends, Jeff here from House of Heresy, and back once again with another Commander/EDH deck tech video. So today we're going to be talking about Angels. This is another one of my tribal decks, and it is a lot of fun. I would say, well, we'll talk about power level at the end. So I use these two interchangeably. Whichever one is not my commander just goes in the 99, but they're basically same cost and just do different things. So I kind of go back and forth. I know this one's more popular with the community, but I have fun with this one too. So basically, since Forgotten Archangel is the one that I usually use, I'll talk about her first. So they both cost a black, 2 white, and 2 generic, and it's a 4/5 flying lifelink, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So that is pretty powerful, especially if there's board wipes going on or targeted removal or whatever. Or just creatures dying in general. Like, people don't like their stuff to get exiled because it's hard for them to get it back. So it can just be kind of a mean card, and she's got a pretty good stat line. Then the lifelink is also quite helpful for other parts of the deck. And then the other side of it, if we wanted to do Liesa, Shroud of Dusk, this is the one from Commander Legends. Same cost, she's a 5/5, and rather than pay 2 generic for each previous time you cast the spell from the command zone this game, pay 2 life that many times. So you have an alternate cost to her coming out of the command zone. So really she's only ever going to cost 5 mana unless you just can't afford to pay the life. She's also got flying and lifelink, and whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 2 life. So this is kind of a tax card there. So they both have the lifelink and flying, which is what I'm more interested in general. So it's just really either effect. I think this one can be a little bit meaner, so depending on how you choose to play against the pod would probably determine which one you go with. I usually go with her, like I said, because one, I think the artwork's kind of cool, and two, you don't see her that much compared to Shroud of Dusk. So it's just kind of, it's a personal preference. They're both in the deck, just one's commander, one's not. All right, so we'll get into creatures. Obviously, we got a bunch of angels, so we'll start with those. So of course, Avacyn, Angel of Hope, is going to go in almost any angel deck that takes white, which is quite helpful. It's got flying, vigilance, indestructible. Other permanents you control have indestructible, and it's an 8/8. Now she does cost a lot, but once she's on the board, she generally doesn't leave unless they have some form of indestructible interaction, like -1/-1 counters or exile. So she's quite good. All right, next up we got Lyra Dawnbringer. She just got a reprint. She's quite good, obviously. She costs 2 white and 3 generic for flying, first strike, lifelink. Other angels you control have +1/+1 and have lifelink, and she's a 5/5. So she's got a nice Lord effect going there. Really no reason not to put her in. And that's some of my favorite artwork to come out of Dominaria Remastered. This is another, well, this one's actually a new one from this last year, out of Streets of New Capenna. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, Giada, Font of Hope, or whatever. She's 1 and a white, so she's by far one of the cheapest creatures in the deck, and definitely one of the cheapest angels. And she's a 2/2 with flying and vigilance, and she has whenever other angels you control enters the battlefield with each other angel you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each angel you already control. Then you can tap, add a white and spend this mana only to cast an angel spell. So she does a ton. And honestly, if I wasn't using black in this deck, I probably would make her the commander, because that's really strong and she's super cheap. So she, if you can get her out early, she's going to have a big impact on your ability to get your other angels out. And they get big in a hurry. Then we got Thraben Watcher, 2 white and 2 generic for a 2/2 with flying and vigilance. And other non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. So she's a lord, just not restricted to angels. She'll give that to all the other creatures we have in here, which we do have a few that aren't angels. Not a ton, but there's a few. Saphira, Sky's Blade. She's a little expensive, but she does have an alternate casting cost. So she's 3 white and 4 generic for a 7/7, which is quite good. And you can pay 1 white and tap 4 untapped creatures you control with flying rather than pay this spell's mana cost. She's got flying and lifelink, and other creatures you control with flying have indestructible. So if you're struggling to get her or to pay her cost normally, you could cheat her out. You'd still have to have other creatures. This deck doesn't focus quite as heavily on like token generation as some Angels decks do, I believe. So you might not have a ton of creatures. That might be like your whole board state tapping to bring her out. However, most of your creatures in this deck do have flying, and giving them indestructible is really mean. But she does not have indestructible, unfortunately, so you have to be careful with her. You get Righteous Valkyrie, another one of the cheaper ones. She's a white and 2 generic for a 2/4 flying angel cleric. Whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And as long as you have at least 7 more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. So she's pretty solid. We have a fair bit of life gain in this deck. That's kind of one of the sub themes of the deck. After the angels, and we have some cards that we'll talk about later on that interact with that. So it's a good card in here. I've got Akroma, Vision of Ixidor. This is the one out of Commander Legends. Really, really good card. She's a little expensive, but most angels are. So she's 2 white, 5 generic for a 6/6 flyer with first strike, vigilance, and trample. And at the beginning of each combat until end of turn, each other creature you control gets +1/+1 if it has flying, and so on for everything else. So basically, keywords make them bigger, which is, again, quite nice. So it's a really strong card. We got Adakar Valkyrie with 2 white and 4 generic for a 4/5 angel. She's got flying and vigilance. You can tap her when target creature other than her dies this turn, return that card to the battlefield under your control. So it's another way, especially if you're playing the Forgotten Archangel variant of the deck, then it's another way to kind of protect your creatures and keep them coming back. Steel Seraph, here's another new card from this past year. This came out of Brothers War for 6 generic, or you can pay the prototype cost of 2 white and 1 generic. It's got flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains your choice of flying, vigilance, or lifelink until end of turn. So it's pretty strong. Almost all the creatures in the deck have at least one of those keywords, so the ability to add a different one is pretty nice. And then so it can either be a 5/4 or a 3/3, depending on which cost you pay. You got Youthful Valkyrie for a white and a generic 1/3 flying angel. Whenever another angel enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Youthful Valkyrie. So this one can get pretty big, especially if you get her out early. Late game, not as good, but we do have different ways to keep replaying our angels, especially if Liesa's out and they die or whatever. So you could still get value from her later on. It just depends on how many angels you have left. Eradicator Valkyrie, got 2 black and 2 generic for a 4/3 with Angel Berserker with flying, lifelink, hexproof from Planeswalkers. I don't think I've ever actually had that come into play, but I guess it could, especially with all the Planeswalkers we've been getting that have actually been pretty decent in the last few sets. So she's got Boast, which I believe Boast is when you attack, you can pay the Boast cost, which in this case is a black and 1 generic. And you can sacrifice a creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. So this is very situational with this deck because, like I said, I don't have a ton of token generation. So chances are I'm sacrificing a creature that I otherwise wouldn't want to. However, if Liesa's on the board, then that creature is just going to come back to my hand. So there's some interactions you can have there, which makes her pretty good in this deck. Vengeful Reaper. Got a black and 3 generic for a 2/3 Angel Cleric. She's got flying, death touch, and haste. She's one of the few death touchers in the deck, so that makes her pretty useful. And then she's got foretell, so you could pay the foretell cost of 2 generic, and then play her on a later turn for the alternate cost there of a black and 1 generic, which could definitely come into play, especially if you get her out, or if you have her in your opening hand, maybe on turn 1 or 2, depending on if you have a little ramp. You foretell her and then bring her out the next turn. Angel of Ruins. This is a fun one. This came out of C21. A little expensive, but got a pretty nice effect. So 2 white, 5 generic for a 5/7. Great stats there. She's a flying angel. And when Angel of Ruin enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. So that's pretty strong. A lot of decks kind of struggle with the enchantment interaction. Artifacts are a little bit easier, although in these colors, not as great. So we, especially with Brothers War coming out not that long ago, and in my current play groups that I participate in, we have a fair number of artifact-heavy decks. So it's a nice little insurance there, and then she gets to benefit from all the other angel bonuses that we get. And then she's also got plane cycling, so you can pay 2 generic to discard it and search your library for planes. So if you're kind of struggling early on and she's in like your opening hand, it's a good way to get some value without having to wait to cast her for 7 mana. Then you got the Valkyrie Harbinger. So 2 white and 4 generic for a 4/5 Angel Cleric with flying and lifelink. And at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 4 more life this turn, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. So she is one of our few token generators we have in the deck. When she's out, it's great, but she tends to die pretty quickly because people just really don't like seeing growing hordes of angel tokens on the other side of the battlefield. So she tends to not survive super long, but quite good. We do have quite a bit of life generation between lifelink and some other stuff we'll get into, so it's a good one for this deck. You get Karmic Guide. It's a classic. 2 white, 3 generic for a 2/2 Angel Spirit with flying and protection from black. When it ETBs, you can return target card from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is quite good because we have a lot of very expensive creatures in here. And then you also have the Echo mechanic, so you can pay 2 white and 3 generic. At the beginning of your upkeep, if this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay its Echo cost. So you're going to have to pay for it twice. Usually not worth it, especially if Liesa's out on the battlefield. Just let it go to the graveyard, and then it'll go to your hand instead. All right, we got Enduring Angel. This is kind of a fun one. So it's a 3 white, 2 generic for a 3/3 with flying double strike, and you have hexproof, which is quite nice. If your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform Enduring Angel and your life becomes 3. Then if Enduring Angel didn't transform this way, you lose the game. So if your opponents have a way to interact with that after that effect resolves, then you lose. So the other side, when you transform her, is she's got flying, you still have hexproof, and her power and toughness are equal to your life total, and whenever she attacks, double your life total. So we already have a fair bit of life gain. This is kind of like a last resort card. I honestly haven't had this really come into play. She's mostly just been a 3/3, or she dies. If people are targeting me, they'll usually kill her before they go the rest of the way to take me out. Then we got Cleaving Reaper. It's a excuse me, 2 black, 3 generic for a 5/3 Angel Berserker with flying and trample. One of our few tramplers in the deck. It might be our only one actually. And then you can pay 3 life, return Cleaving Reaper from your graveyard to your hand, activate this ability only if you had an Angel or Berserker enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So she's got a nice bit of recursion there. It's just good insurance, nice way to get some value out of, even if she does somehow make it into your graveyard, you still have a chance to bring her back. Then you got Sarah Avenger for 2 white and a 3/3. However, you can't cast a spell during your first, second, or third turns of the game, and she's got flying and vigilance. So, still a 2 mana 3/3. It's one of the few one of the few ways you could get more than one angel in a turn. Most of the time, it's pretty rare to be able to pay for that, pay for more than one angel. Then we got Archangel of Thune for 2 white, 3 generic. It's a 3/4 angel with flying and lifelink, and whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So she is another staple, using that secondary theme of the deck to have the life gain there. So she can help your board state get real big real fast. We got Fira, or Judge of Valor, for 2 black, 1 white, and 2 generic. It's a 2/4 Angel Cleric with flying and lifelink. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So we have a little bit of graveyard recursion, but this is a nice way to kind of loot through your deck as needed, because we don't have a ton of card draw in here. So this is kind of an alternate way to do that. Sarah's Emissary. This is a great card. A little expensive, but really can can have a profound impact on the game. I've been able to use it and have it used against me in pretty, like I said, impactful ways. So it's 3 white and 4 generic for a 7/7 Flying Angel. When it ETBs, choose a card type. You and creatures you control have protection from the chosen card type. So this can be really helpful if you have, if you're facing like a real creature heavy deck, which I have in the past, that pretty much stalled the game out until I was able to rebuild my board state. Or if you're playing like a blue deck or something with a lot of control, you could pick instant or sorcery or something like that, but just quite strong. Magister of Worth, this one's kind of a fun one. So black, white, and 4 generic for a 4/4 flyer, and it's got the Will of the Council. So when it enters the battlefield starting with you, each player votes for Grace or Condemnation. If Grace gets more votes, each player returns each creature or card from their graveyard to the battlefield. If Condemnation gets more votes or the votes are tied, destroy all creatures other than Magister of Worth. So this is a nice either board wipe or recursion. Unfortunately, you're recurring everybody's, but it's a fun card. And with how expensive and beefy most angels are, it's you're probably going to come out ahead even if you're returning all the creatures onto the battlefield. All right, now we're going to get into the non-angels in the creature pool here. So Esper Sentinel goes without saying. It's a white deck. No reason not to put Esper Sentinel in there. It's quite good. Starnheim Aspirant. This one isn't an angel, but it really helps angels. So angel spells you control or you cast cost 2 less to cast, 2 generic less. So that's quite good with how expensive they are. So really good to have out there. Solemn Simulacrum gives us some card draw, gives us some ability to ramp a little bit, which is nice. This is one you wouldn't necessarily have to have in there, but white and black don't have great ramp, so this is a good way to kind of deal with that. And then Bishop of Wings. So this one you get 4 life every time an angel ETBs. And whenever an angel you control dies, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So this combined with Liesa can be pretty mean because you can be generating those spirits and then recasting your angels because they're going back to your hand. And for 2 white, it's a really strong card. All right, so those are the creatures. As you saw, mostly angel heavy focus, and the creatures that aren't are either just good utility creatures or have some benefit to the angel tribe. All right, so then we'll get into some of the more tribal based cards in the deck here that are going to help give us payoffs for having for choosing angels. So Vanquisher's Banner, this is a pretty common one in these types of decks. You've seen it in my Svelun deck. When it ETBs, you choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type get 1/1/1, and when you cast them, you get to draw a card. So very strong. 5 mana is a little expensive, but these games, if you're playing this deck, you're expecting to play a slower game anyways most of the time. So it all works out. Herald's Horn, again, you're picking a creature type, and then they cost 1 generic less. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your library, and if it is the creature type that you've chosen, you can reveal it and put it into your hand. So it's a nice way to get a little extra value with the cards on top. Urza's Incubator just got reprinted, no reason not to put it in here. You pick a creature type and they cost 2 generic less. So again, we're trying to make our really expensive angels a little bit cheaper and hopefully get them out sooner. Pillar of Origins, this one it's basically a mana rock for the creature type that you choose. And then I got Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, which are nice ways to protect the creatures or let them start swinging right away. So it's always feels good to start attacking with the 7/7 that you just played. All right, so now we got some of the cards that get a bigger payoff for having the life gain in the deck. So Test of Endurance just got a reprint. It's 2 white and 2 generic. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 50 or more life, you win the game. So it is possible to have this go off fairly quickly, I guess. I honestly just added it to the deck not that long ago, and I haven't played it yet, so I'm unsure as to how great it's going to be, but it seems like a pretty solid card. Cleric class, This is another one that really plays into the life gain. So for 1 mana, just straight off, if you just want to pay the 1 white, you get an extra life every time you would gain life. And then as you level it up, whenever you gain life, you can put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Kind of got that Heliod thing going there. And then when it becomes level 3, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and you gain life equal to its toughness. So it's just a really strong card. Even if you only pay the 1 mana cost, you'll probably get good value. You'll be getting a bunch of life. Then we got Sanguine Bond. I do not have Exquisite Blood in here, so this is purely when I gain life, I'm able to ping my opponents. So it's kind of handy. Hopefully we'll speed up the game a little bit and help bring it to a victorious conclusion for the Angels. Then we got Alhammaret's Archive. So if you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead, and if you draw a card, except your first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So we don't have a ton of card draw. We have a little bit. So the second part is kind of very situational. But the first part is we like that because we want to gain that life and keep plugging away. And then we got Well of Lost Dreams. Whenever you gain life, you can pay X, where X is less than or equal to the number or the amount of life you gained if you do draw a card. So this is one of our few card draw engines we have in here, which you could potentially use if you have enough mana up to draw a bunch of cards. Cosmos Elixir. So this one's 4 generic at the beginning of your end step. Draw a card draw a card if your life total is greater than your starting life total. Otherwise, you gain 2 life. So usually, once this goes out, for whatever reason, my regular play group does not like this card. So they always make sure to ping me below 40 for some reason. Not sure why. Because really, just drawing the card, 4 mana to draw a card every turn is good, but it's not like worth going out of your way to stop, I think. But I don't know. They're real dead set on it, so I usually just gain the life. And then you get the Book of Exalted Deeds. So you can pay 3 white at the beginning of your end step. If you gained 3 or more life this turn, create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying. So this is one of our other token generators. And then you can pay 3 white to tap it and exile it and put an enlightened counter on target angel. It gains, you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. And you can activate only as a sorcery. So if you can get that out on like Avacyn, Angel of Hope or something like that, then it's going to be really challenging for your opponents to close the game out. So it's kind of a fun card that makes them have to figure out how to deal with. All right, next up we have these are cards that are just beneficial. So Chrome as well, this one's just a really strong one, especially if you have your commander out. Came out in Commander Legends. It's part of the will cycle. So you pay a white and 3 generic, and you can choose one, or if you control your commander, you choose both. Basically, you're just giving all your creatures a bunch of keywords. It's kind of a finisher. I mean, if you had a Chroma out, then which is kind of what that's obviously goes hand in hand with, then all your creatures would get super big, and you'd probably win either way. But it's a nice little finishing card, or it does give your creatures indestructible and protection from all colors. So you could also use this as like a kind of like a heroic intervention style. All right, Sajiri's Shelter. You can give target creature you control protection from a color of your choice until end of turn, or you can play it as a white source. So it's kind of a nice little utility card there. Dark Ritual, goes without saying, is black in this deck, so no reason not to put it in. Revitalize, it's life gain and card draw, so 2 things we like. So pretty solid. Blood Pact, this is card draw and loss of life. However, not that big of a deal because you're hopefully gaining a bunch of life, so you don't mind losing the life to draw 2 cards. And then same thing with Greed. This is kind of going in the opposite direction that you're trying to do with the life gain. However, if you are able to consistently gain that life, then you can draw a bunch of cards. So I think it's a pretty useful enchantment to have in here. Nice way to kind of counteract some of the deficiencies of these colors when it comes to being able to reliably do card draw. All right, then we have our different types of removal. So Pact of the Serpent. This is technically, I'm considering this removal. However, this is also card draw for us. If we choose angels and ourselves, then we can draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of angels that we have. So there's a bit. It's a nice. It could go either way. It also can be very punishing against other tribal decks, especially if they're getting low on life. This might be enough to kill them. Kill them with kindness as you're making them draw cards. And you got Vindicate, just simple destruction spell there. Swords to Plowshares, of course. I think we all know what that is. Vanishing Verse, another exile effect for monocolored permanents. Generous Gift is another destruction, single target. Path to Exile, another exile effect. Invoke the Divine. You're destroying target artifact or enchantment and gaining 4 life. This one's kind of situational. You may or may not want to put this in the deck, but life gain's nice, and it is nice to be able to interact with the artifacts and enchantments as needed. So it's I don't mind having it in here. This isn't like a super high powered deck in my opinion, so I don't mind having some, I guess, suboptimal cards. Then you got Kaya's Wrath. So this one is destroy all creatures and you gain life equal to the number of creatures you controlled that were destroyed this way. This can work out in your favor if you got Liesa on the board. She'll still get destroyed, but all the other creatures will get exiled and then returned to your hand at the end of turn, so it kind of can work out well in your favor. Vanquish the Horde is just a board clear. It gets cheaper for all the creatures you have or that are on the battlefield. Austere Command is also can be a board clear. You choose to. 6 mana, it's a little expensive. I actually don't have Farewell in here, which is interesting. I might have run out of copies, but usually I would put that in every deck I could. But this is kind of the next best thing, I guess, when it comes to choosing what you want to destroy. So especially if, depending on who you're facing, destroying cheaper creatures or a bunch of tokens could be helpful in keeping all your angels alive. All right, we have a little bit of tutoring / recursions. This is Grim Tutor. That's kind of a little hard to read, but this is from the Mischief Secret Lair, so I think some of the coolest cards they've done came out of that particular drop, so pretty neat. Agadeem's Awakening. You can play this for a land, or you can recur a bunch of your creatures, depending on how much you put into it. And then Persist, kind of the slightly less expensive version of Entomb. Or I'm sorry, not Entomb. So I drawn a blank on the name. Anyways, you basically return target non-legendary creature you control from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. This is a little situational in this deck because most of our angels are legendary, but you can get some value out of it. There's some decent creatures in there that you could pull out that are not legendary. All right, then we're getting into kind of our ramp-esque pile here. So you got Gift of Estates, which lets you search for planes and put them in your hand if your opponent has more lands than you. So if you're missing land drops or if you're not going first, then this one's pretty good. Land tax, same thing. You ideally don't want to be going first when you play this, but at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So nice way to pull basics out. And it's an enchantment, so it just stays on the battlefield for 1 white. It's quite a good card. Archaeomancer's Map. This one also came out of C21. It lets you search your library for 2 planes, basic planes, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your opponent's control, if they have more lands than you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So take advantage of other players' ramp to bolster your own with what little we can do here with these colors. And then you got the usual mana rocks. So Thought Vessel, Soul Ring, Talisman of Hierarchy, Orzhov Signet, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, and Mind Stone. So usual slew of Commander staple mana rocks there. So we have a little bit of ramp, what we can. And then the final pile are our lands. So of course it's a tribal deck. If you are able to afford it or have copies, then Cavern of Souls is almost always a must include for your tribal decks, because you can use 1 mana of any color to cast your chosen creature type, and that spell can't be countered, which is awesome. So very strong card. We do have black, so it's nice to be able to have a little bit of mana fixing. So we got Urborg and Cabal Coffers in here. Not super useful because we don't have that much black compared to white, but I did go heavier on the basic planes. So Hall of Heliod's Generosity. So this one, again, can be a little bit situational, but we have some pretty decent enchantments depending on what's going on in the game. So it's a nice way to tutor recur an enchantment back onto the battlefield eventually. It goes on top of your graveyard, and then you would draw it and replay it. So it's a little bit of recursion there for the enchantments, which is kind of nice. Figured no reason not to put it in. Bajuka Bog is just good old graveyard hate. I usually will put that in most of my decks that I have black. There's our one fetch land, and then we got Mirrored Landscape, which is a kind of fetch land. Path of Ancestry, usually good to have for any commander that's got more than one color, because it helps you with mana fixing, and then if they share a creature type, then you get to scry one. So especially for tribal, it's a pretty decent land card. Temple of the False God. This is one you probably don't need to put in if you don't want to or don't have a copy of, but with how expensive the angels are, it's not a bad way to get a little bit extra, because most of the angels have a decent amount of generic mana that you're having to pay. Radiant Fountain is another one that's like not super pertinent, but it does gain you life, so it can interact with some of your spells. Reliquary Tower, if you do go off and draw a bunch of cards, always nice to be able to keep them. Command Tower, Godless Shrine, got our Shockland, Orzhov Basilica, the Bounce Land. This is the Snarl for our colors here. Temple of Silence, again, this is one that you probably don't need. I'm sure that I am sure there are better lands, but I wasn't trying to go super hardcore with this deck, so put a scry land in there. And then I have, I think, 8 plains and 6 swamps as our basic land types. So yeah, that concludes the run through there. Hope everyone enjoyed it. I would probably rate this about a 7.5 to 8 on the power level. I hate to go too much lower because you got cards like Avacyn and stuff in here that are pretty strong. But at the same time, I consider this to be like a pretty fair deck. Like, you are not going off quickly in most cases. Even if you get the perfect draw, you're still playing most likely one creature at a time, even if it's coming out a little bit earlier. And you're swinging for combat damage. And I don't have a way in this deck really to like one-shot somebody, either through commander damage or just in general, unless I've had the opportunity to build my deck up. So I think that's a pretty fair power level. I think most of the time people enjoy playing against this because it's not super fast. It's kind of similar to my Samurai deck that I did a video on not that long ago, in terms of like how people view it. So in the power level. So I think it's a really fun deck. And it's kind of a nice way to play a bunch of big creatures without going green and playing green stompies. So yeah, we'd love to hear if anyone has any thoughts or comments about the deck in general, or what I could do differently, or if you play an Angels deck, like what you use. There's lots of different ways you can do it. I'm sure there's a lot of ways you could cheat stuff out or go more heavy on the token generation and stuff like that. But yeah, so this is what it is. And yeah, so if you liked it, please throw a like down. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Got usually at least 3 videos a week, with 2 of them being pack cracking episodes, and then we do the deck tech videos on Saturdays. So thanks again for watching, everyone, and until next time.